Under the moonlight that flooded the deck of the oceanfront house, those whispered words had changed everything. "I'll take it slow." 3 simple words that, in Lawrence Miller's deep voice, carried a universe of possibilities. Emily Thompson, her hands already marked by daily work with New England clay, couldn't understand why he, owner of businesses across America, showed such consideration for her feelings. True encounters are never the product of chance, but the silent convergence of 2 destinies that were unaware of each other until that moment. In the small coastal town of Golden Bay, Maine, known for its traditional music festivals and its colony of fishermen who resisted modernity, no one would have imagined that the youngest potter in town would catch the attention of the entrepreneur who had just purchased the old colonial mansion overlooking the cliff. Her hands, despite her young age, created tiles and unique pieces that combined traditional techniques learned from her grandmother with a contemporary vision that only youth could bring. The May sun bathed the central square where the Spring Craft Festival was held, an event that had brought together regional artisans for generations. Emily arranged her creations on a worn wooden table inherited from her grandmother. Each piece seemed to capture the New England light, the blue and ochre glazes reminiscent of both the sea and the earth of Maine. "You should raise your prices, Emily. Your talent is worth much more than what you're asking," advised Sarah, her best friend since elementary school, helping her arrange her modest display. "People around here can't afford to pay more," Emily replied, adjusting a vase with organic shapes. "And besides, it's the craftsmanship that matters, not the money." It was at that precise moment that she noticed him, a man in his mid-40s, elegantly dressed but without ostentation, observing her creations with an attention unlike that of typical tourists. His eyes didn't flutter from one piece to another. They lingered, scrutinized, seemed to read the hidden story in each curve of clay. Emily felt an unexpected warmth rise to her cheeks when their eyes met. She quickly looked away, pretending to rearrange a series of small bowls with irregular edges. "Who still uses this coil technique with this type of glaze?" The man's voice was calm, almost academic. Surprised that he recognized the ancestral method she employed, Emily looked up. "My grandmother taught me it's a technique that's disappearing." "It was disappearing," he corrected with a barely perceptible smile, "until hands like yours resurrected it." The exchange that followed changed the course of her day. Lawrence Miller, that was his name, bought not 1 or 2 pieces, but her entire collection of glazed tiles representing the seascapes of the coast, a sum that far exceeded what she usually earned in an entire month. "I'm renovating a property not far from here," he explained, handing her his card. "Your work deserves to be seen by more people. Would you agree to dinner to discuss a business partnership?" Wariness was immediate. Young women like her had been told since childhood to be wary of rich, older men. Yet in his eyes, she read neither condescension nor that predatory gleam she had learned to recognize in certain men. "I'm not sure that—" "The address is on the card," he cut her off gently. "Come if you wish. If not, I'll come back to your workshop to order more pieces. The decision is yours." She watched him walk away, his silhouette outlined against the intense blue of the Atlantic. The card between her fingers simply bore a name, a phone number, and an address on the heights of the bay. Sarah, who had observed the exchange from a distance, rushed over to her. "Who was that? Did he buy something?" "He bought everything," Emily murmured, still in shock. "Absolutely everything." That evening, in front of the small mirror in her apartment above her workshop, Emily contemplated her reflection. At 20, her face already carried the intensity of someone who had found her calling. Her hands, slightly rough and stained by clay she could never completely clean off, testified to a commitment that few people her age demonstrated. "Grandma, what would you have done?" she whispered to the framed image of the old woman on her dresser. The black and white photograph showed a woman with features marked by the sun and work, but whose eyes shone with fierce determination. The decision was made almost despite herself. Something in this man's gaze had touched a sensitive chord, awakening a curiosity she didn't know she had. Lawrence Miller's house revealed the first surprise. Despite the imposing address on the Maine coast, the interior was surprisingly warm, without the expected ostentation. An elderly woman, whom Lawrence introduced as Mrs. Rose, the soul of this house forever, served typical New England dishes in pottery that Emily immediately recognized. "That's Bennington pottery," she exclaimed, gently touching the edge of a plate with olive and sea patterns. "You have a good eye," Lawrence approved. "These pieces remind me of my youth in Boston. My mother collected traditional pottery." The evening progressed with an ease that Emily had not anticipated. Lawrence spoke little of himself, preferring to question her about her techniques, her inspiration, the story behind each pattern she created. Not once did he make an inappropriate allusion or show interest other than professional. "Why are my creations of such interest to you?" she finally dared to ask, as Mrs. Rose served a blueberry dessert. Lawrence took his time to answer, his eyes fixing on an invisible point beyond the bay window overlooking the sea. "In a world where everything is becoming digital, ephemeral, disposable, your creations bear the imprint of time and authenticity. They tell a story that our era is desperately trying to forget." He then explained his project, restoring several historic properties across America, using exclusively traditional materials and techniques. "Your glazed tiles would be perfect for the house near Bar Harbor. If you accept, it would be the beginning of a collaboration that could extend to other projects." The proposal was generous, almost too much so. "I don't understand why you don't contact more experienced artisans," she confessed. "Experience can be acquired, Miss Thompson. Talent, however, is innate, and you have it in spades." On the deck, after dinner, the moon reflected on the calm waters of the Atlantic. A comfortable silence had settled between them. "I feel like you see something in me that I don't see myself," she murmured, troubled by this new sensation. "Sometimes we need others' gaze to discover our true value," he replied softly. Then, as if sensing her apprehension about this sudden attention, he added, "I'll take it slow." These words, spoken with disarming sincerity, resonated within her long after she had left the house. On the way home, walking along the maritime promenade, Emily found herself smiling in the darkness. For the first time since her grandmother's death, she felt that a door was opening to a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Wariness is the vigilant sentinel of the heart, but it must not become its jailer. In the weeks that followed, Lawrence's visits to her small workshop on Artisans Square became as regular as the tides. He never arrived in a luxury car, preferring to walk along the shoreline promenade, sometimes with a sketchbook under his arm. Emily's workshop, nestled under the century-old arches of the square, was a place where time seemed suspended. Light filtered through narrow windows, creating golden rays in which clay particles danced. The smell of damp earth and glazes mingled with the more subtle scent of wild herbs that dried in bunches hanging from the ceiling, inspiration for her patterns. Lawrence often sat on a stool in a corner, silently observing Emily's hands giving life to clay. He asked insightful questions about the glazing techniques she had learned from her grandmother, sometimes taking notes in his sketchbook. "You should raise your prices," he suggested one afternoon, after a customer had left the workshop with a piece sold well below its value. "People around here can't afford it," she replied, repeating the same words she had addressed to Sarah. "But tourists can. And your work deserves to be valued at its fair measure." These moments of productive quietude were soon troubled by comments from Sarah and other friends. "Be careful," Sarah warned her one evening, as they shared a drink on the small terrace above the workshop. "Men like him aren't interested in the art of girls like us. There are always other intentions." "It's not like that," Emily protested. "He's respectful, professional. He's 25 years older than you, Emily. And he's rich. The classic combination." These words insinuated themselves into her like a slow poison. Was she naive? Was she imagining a professional relationship where there was only interest of a completely different nature? Doubt settled in, subtle but persistent. She began to scrutinize each gesture, each look from Lawrence, seeking confirmation of her nascent suspicions, yet he never crossed the boundaries she had unconsciously established. Never did a hand linger too long. Never did a compliment exceed the strictly professional framework. One morning, while delivering an order to the Shoreline Hotel, she happened to see a tourist brochure extolling the virtues of a restored castle near Boston. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized her own creations adorning the walls of a room photographed in full page. "Where did these tiles come from?" she asked the receptionist. "Oh, it's Miller Restoration's latest project. A marvel, isn't it? These artisanal tiles are made exclusively for their properties. I believe they cost a fortune." Emily felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Lawrence had bought her creations at a price she already considered generous, but if he was reselling them for a fortune, the sensation of betrayal was immediate and visceral. That evening, when Lawrence presented himself at the workshop as usual, he found Emily unusually silent, her face closed. He immediately understood that something had changed. "What's wrong?" he asked directly. She handed him the brochure without a word. Lawrence examined it, then placed it gently on the workbench. "I was going to tell you about this," he said calmly. "When? After selling all my creations for a fortune without me seeing any of it? It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her hurt. Lawrence sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I didn't want you to change your creative process because of commercial pressure. You're only 20 and have a talent that shouldn't be corrupted by the market." It was the first time he had switched to the informal you, and strangely, this detail struck her more than his explanations. "You lied to me," she replied, deliberately returning to the formal address. "No, I protected you. There's a difference. Truth is like clay. It takes the shape of the hands that manipulate it." The confrontation left a bitter taste in Emily's mouth. In the days that followed, Lawrence ceased his visits to the workshop. The silence that settled in was both a relief and a painful absence she hadn't anticipated. With her hands in clay, she found herself listening for the familiar footsteps under the arches. "See, I was right," Sarah commented, with barely veiled satisfaction. "He disappeared as soon as you confronted him. Classic." But Emily wasn't convinced. Something in Lawrence's explanation resonated with her despite her anger. Hadn't she always feared that commercial success would corrupt her artistic vision? Wasn't that precisely what her grandmother had taught her? That authenticity should take precedence over profit. A week passed, then another. The usual orders continued to arrive, but the excitement of the projects discussed with Lawrence was missing. One morning, as she opened her workshop, she found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a formal contract proposing a collaboration with Miller Restorations, financial terms much more advantageous than she had imagined, and a handwritten note. "Complete transparency this time. Your decision." "Lawrence?" The contract stipulated that she would retain all rights to her creations, that each use would be documented, and that she would receive a percentage of future sales. More surprising still, it included a clause allowing her to visit each property where her works would be installed. Emily read the document several times, looking for the trap, the flaw that would confirm her suspicions. She found none. When the invitation to discover his summer home in Cape Cod arrived a few days later, she hesitated for a long time. The difference in age and social status created invisible but very real barriers. Yet curiosity, and a feeling she could not yet name, pushed her to accept. The Cape Cod property, more modest than the Golden Bay house, surprised Emily with its authenticity. A colonial house, renovated with scrupulous respect for local architectural traditions. In the living room with exposed beams, ancient pottery stood alongside contemporary creations. "Most of these pieces belong to my mother," Lawrence explained as he showed her around. She was passionate about traditional pottery. The evening unfolded on the deck overlooking a garden where beach roses and wild grasses competed for space. Dinner, once again prepared by Mrs. Rose, who seemed to follow Lawrence to all his residences, was served in the same Bennington pottery that Emily had admired during their first meeting. "Why me?" she finally asked, as the sun set over the sea in a spectacle of purple and gold. Among all the artisans in the region, why choose a 20-year-old beginner? Lawrence contemplated his wine glass before answering. "Because you create with your soul, not just with your hands. That's become rare." Then, as if sensing that this answer wasn't enough, he added, "I'll take it slow." This was the second time he had spoken these words, and their meaning was beginning to take on a different dimension for Emily. It wasn't an allusion to any romantic intention, but a promise not to rush her artistic development, respecting her time to grow professionally. This revelation brought unexpected appeasement. For the first time in weeks, she felt her shoulders relax, the weight of suspicion lightening slightly. But the respite was short-lived. The 4th of July festival, with its traditional fireworks illuminating the bay, attracted visitors from all over the region each year. Emily's workshop, decorated with garlands of dried flowers, welcomed a steady flow of tourists and locals. This year, she had prepared a special collection inspired by the flames and legends associated with this ancestral celebration. The mood was festive when a shadow fell over her display. A young man, whose calculated elegance failed to mask obvious hostility, examined her creations with a contemptuous smirk. "So you're my father's new obsession," he said without preamble. Emily felt her blood freeze. "Excuse me?" "Thomas Miller," he introduced himself with a coldness that contrasted violently with the ambient warmth. "Lawrence Miller's only son, whom you seem to have perfectly enchanted." The words struck her like slaps. The existence of a son had never been mentioned by Lawrence. "I don't know what you're imagining, but spare me the denials," he cut her off sharply. "While my father rhapsodizes over your pottery, our family business is collapsing. Did you know we're facing an unprecedented financial crisis? That banks are threatening to seize several of our properties?" The revelation hit her full force. Lawrence, in financial difficulty. The man who bought her creations at top dollar, who owned several homes on the most expensive coast in America. "I don't understand," she stammered. "My father is obsessed with you. You're just a distraction while we lose everything," he concluded bitterly, before turning on his heel, leaving her stunned amid the festivities. Night fell on Golden Bay, the bonfires illuminating the beach with an orange glow. But for Emily, the darkness seemed deeper than ever. Thomas's accusations played on a loop in her mind, mingling with memories of moments spent with Lawrence, creating an unbearable dissonance. Back in her small apartment, she pulled out every document, every note exchanged with Lawrence, looking for clues, signs she might have missed. How could an apparently wealthy man be on the brink of ruin? And why continue to invest in her creations if such was the case? Sleep eluded her. In the early morning, a decision imposed itself. She had to confront Lawrence directly, demand the complete truth. She found him in the Golden Bay house, seated before a pile of documents, his face marked by a fatigue she had never noticed before. At the sight of her, he appeared both surprised and relieved. "Your son came to see me yesterday," she announced without preamble. Lawrence's expression froze. A flash of anger crossed his gaze, quickly replaced by weary resignation. "Thomas has always had a knack for complicating situations," he murmured. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." "Is it true?" Emily insisted. "Are you in financial difficulty?" A long silence settled, during which Lawrence seemed to weigh each word of his response. "Yes," he finally admitted. "Some investments in New York real estate have gone badly, very badly." The truths began to emerge like bubbles in boiling water. The empire was indeed going through a deep crisis. The house, the cars, everything could disappear in a few months if the situation didn't improve. "Why continue to seek me out if you have financial problems?" she questioned, confused by the attention of a man who should have been focused on saving his business. Lawrence rose, approached the window overlooking the sea. The morning sun made the waves sparkle like thousands of diamonds. "Because some things are worth more than money, Emily. Some legacies must be preserved, whatever the cost. In moments when everything seems to be falling apart, it is our fundamental values that reveal who we truly are." The week that followed was marked by a respectful distance between them. Emily, disturbed by the revelations, immersed herself in her work with new intensity. Her hands shaped the clay as if to exorcise the doubts that assailed her, creating pieces with more complex forms, with more daring glazes. One morning, as she was loading a series of bowls into her kiln, the workshop bell rang. Lawrence stood on the threshold, an undecipherable expression on his face. "I'd like to show you something," he said simply. "If you'll trust me one last time." The proposal surprised Emily. Despite the shadows that remained, a deep intuition whispered to her that Lawrence's intentions were not malevolent. "Where are you taking me?" "To my origins, and perhaps to yours as well." The journey took them far from the main coast, toward a radically different landscape. After several hours of driving, the Atlantic shoreline gave way to the rolling hills of Vermont. The warm colors of the coast faded in favor of the greens, blues, and earthy tones of rural New England. Stonebrook, a tiny village nestled in a valley protected from the harsh mountain winds, finally appeared. The clapboard houses with their slate roofs seemed to have grown directly from the rocky soil, indestructible against the repeated assaults of the elements. "This is where I grew up," Lawrence revealed as they walked through the village on foot. Son of artisans, not entrepreneurs. Emily's surprise must have shown on her face, for Lawrence sketched a melancholy smile. The empire my son speaks of so bitterly, I built from nothing. But I never forgot where I came from. He led her to a small house set back from the others, whose peeling blue door contrasted with the weathered white clapboard. Inside, time seemed to have stopped. Rustic furniture, worn by the years, stood alongside shelves loaded with ceramics of simple but expressive forms. The house of my childhood, Lawrence explained, caressing with his fingertips a chipped bowl sitting on a dresser. My mother was a potter. She created utilitarian pieces for the villagers and local families. Nothing artistic by current standards, but each object carried her soul. Emily observed every detail, struck by a troubling familiarity in the patterns and techniques visible on certain pieces. Your grandmother and my mother shared the same ceramic techniques, Lawrence continued, his voice softening at the evocation of these memories. When I first saw you working at the Spring Festival, I saw my mother again. The same gestures, the same precision, the same respect for clay. He pulled a worn photo album from a drawer, opened it gently. Black and white images showed a woman with determined features, bent over a rudimentary potter's wheel. My mother died 15 years ago. With her, I thought this particular know-how was disappearing too, until I met you. The bond forming between them suddenly transcended the 25-year age difference that separated them. It wasn't a romantic attraction that motivated Lawrence's interest, but the recognition of a common heritage, of a flame he thought extinguished, and which he found vibrant in Emily's creations. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" she asked softly. "Would you have understood? Wouldn't you have thought I was trying to win you over with a sentimental story?" She had to admit he was right. In their cynical world, the simple truth often seemed less credible than the most twisted assumptions. Lawrence then led her to a small workshop adjacent to the house. The smell of clay and glaze, so familiar to Emily, still lingered slightly, like an olfactory ghost. "This is where it all began for me," he murmured. "Watching my mother create taught me patience, perseverance, and respect for work well done. Principles I applied in business for better or worse." In a corner of the workshop, a shelf displayed a collection of small signed and dated pieces. Emily approached, intrigued. The creations, clumsy but touching, all bore the signature Lawrence M., followed by years corresponding to his adolescence. "My attempts," he explained with an embarrassed smile. "My mother kept them preciously, though they are mediocre compared to her work." "They're authentic," Emily corrected, touched by this unexpected vulnerability. Leaving Stonebrook, the silence in the car was no longer charged with unsaid things, but imbued with a new understanding. The bond uniting Lawrence and Emily took on a dimension that neither could have anticipated at their first meeting. "And now?" Emily finally asked as the Vermont landscapes gradually gave way to the lands of central Maine. "Now, we preserve this heritage, if you still wish to." New England summer was in full swing when Emily received news that upended her perspectives. Her artisanal pieces, displayed in properties restored by Lawrence, had attracted the attention of galleries in New York and Boston. Offers were arriving, proposing significant sums for exclusive collections. In her small workshop, where the summer heat intensified despite the shade of the arches, Emily contemplated the letters spread before her. Success, recognition, financial security, everything a young artisan could dream of was suddenly materializing. "You should accept the New York Gallery's offer," advised Sarah, leafing through the proposals with eyes widened at the mentioned amounts. "It's a unique opportunity." Emily wasn't convinced. These offers, as flattering as they were, implied more standardized production, creativity framed by market expectations. Lawrence, informed of these proposals, presented himself at the workshop one particularly stifling afternoon. He wore a light shirt and held an envelope. "I suppose you've received several offers," he began without preamble. "How do you know?" "The art world is small and your talent is no longer a secret." He placed the envelope on the workbench, next to the wheel where a half-finished cylindrical form was still slowly turning. "My proposal is different," he explained. "A partnership where my market knowledge would unite with your talent. No exclusivity, no artistic formatting, complete creative freedom with the logistical and commercial support you need to grow." Emily opened the envelope. The document detailed an ambitious project, a common brand that would valorize traditional techniques while allowing innovation, workshops in several regions of America to train young artisans, collaborations with contemporary designers. Suspicion, never completely dissipated, resurfaced. Why bet on a 20-year-old girl with no experience when you could partner with recognized artists? Lawrence looked her straight in the eyes. Because you don't create for recognition or money. You create because the clay speaks to you, as it spoke to your grandmother, as it spoke to my mother. This authenticity can't be acquired, it can't be bought. It's there, in your hands. He paused, observing the works in progress that populated the workshop. And also because I'm selfish. Through you, I find a bit of that world I knew as a child, before numbers and contracts dominated my life. The disarming frankness of this admission touched Emily. For the first time, she glimpsed the vulnerability of this man whom everyone perceived as powerful and unshakable. And your financial problems? How could this partnership function if your company is in difficulty? That's precisely where the opportunity lies, he replied. Getting back to the essentials. My recent mistakes come from straying from my fundamental values, from being seduced by quick gains and risky investments. This partnership would be a new start, based on what truly matters: authenticity, quality, transmission. The proposal was tempting, but Emily remained cautious. I need to think about it. Of course, take your time. As he was about to leave, she stopped him with a question. And your son? What does he think of all this? Lawrence's expression darkened. Thomas sees things differently. For him, the business is only a matter of profit and prestige. We have deep disagreements about the direction to take. This response, far from reassuring her, added a layer of complexity to her decision. Partnering with Lawrence would potentially mean exposing herself to Thomas's hostility and becoming involved in family conflicts that were beyond her. The most important choices in our lives rarely present themselves as such at the moment we make them. An unexpected crisis struck Lawrence's business, revealing another layer of the story. One July morning, as the air was already vibrating with nascent heat, Emily found the front of her workshop covered with posters. Reproductions of financial articles highlighting the difficulties of Miller restorations, accompanied by handwritten accusatory comments: dubious partner, company in bankruptcy, run before it's too late. Heart pounding, she tore down the papers before the first passers-by could gather. Under the last sheet, a hastily scrawled note: for your own good. T.M. Thomas Miller. The hostile son bore the resentment of seeing his father pay attention to a young stranger while neglecting family problems. The day unfolded in a fog of worry. Regular customers seemed more distant, some half mentioning rumors circulating in the small town. News of the potential association between Emily and Lawrence had spread, as had that of the latter's financial difficulties. You should distance yourself from him, advised Sarah, who came to bring her a coffee late in the afternoon. His reputation will tarnish yours. Since when do we judge people based on rumors? Emily replied, more sharply than she would have liked. These aren't rumors, Emily. The newspapers are talking about it. His son confirms it. The man is losing everything. During the long nights trying to make a decision, Emily oscillated between trust and doubt. The image of Lawrence in his childhood Vermont home, vulnerable and authentic, contrasted violently with that of the businessman in difficulty depicted by the media. One stormy evening, as the sky tore open above Golden Bay, disaster struck. A pipe burst in the building housing her workshop, flooding the workspace and threatening weeks of creation. Emily, awakened with a start by neighbors' cries, rushed to save what could be saved. Brownish water was already invading the floor, reaching the lower shelves where pieces in the drying process rested. In the darkness crossed by lightning, she desperately tried to move her creations to higher ground, slipping on the soaked tiles. The workshop door opened abruptly, letting in a silhouette that a flash of lightning revealed to be Lawrence. Without a word, he joined her efforts, rolling up sleeves and pants to wade into the rising water. For nearly 2 hours they fought side by side against the flood, saving the majority of the pieces, isolating the electric kiln, moving clay to dry areas. When finally the firefighters arrived to pump out the water, they both collapsed on the outside steps, exhausted and soaked to the bone. The rain continued to fall, but less violently. Under the protective awning, Lawrence broke the silence. I'm sorry for what Thomas is doing. How do you know it's him? Who else? He sighed deeply. My son is wounded. Since his mother's death 10 years ago, he's built a shell that I can't pierce. Between buckets of water and saved ceramics, he confessed, "Your grandmother saved my family from ruin 30 years ago." Emily, who was wringing out a soaked towel, froze. What? Jean Thompson. That was your grandmother's name, wasn't it? The name resonated like an echo from the past. How do you know her? She taught this craft to my mother when we lost everything after my father's bankruptcy. We were living near Bennington then. Your grandmother had a workshop there. She took my mother as an apprentice, taught her to make a living with clay when we had nothing left. The revelation struck Emily with the force of a physical blow. Her grandmother, who died 5 years ago, had never told her this story. Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? Would you have believed such a coincidence? He sketched a tired smile. And besides, I wanted to first see if Jean's talent had been transmitted to her granddaughter, which is undeniably the case. The storm was moving away, leaving only the regular sound of rain on the roofs. In this unreal atmosphere, the circle seemed to close in an unexpected way. Now I want to return that favor, Lawrence murmured. Not out of obligation, but because I believe in you as Jean believed in my mother. In the weeks following the flood, Emily was forced to temporarily relocate her activity. Lawrence made available to her an unoccupied outbuilding of his house, a bright space overlooking the sea that proved ideal for creation. This forced proximity by circumstances created a new dynamic between them. Sometimes working side by side, she on her pottery, he on the files of his struggling business, they developed a complicity tinged with mutual respect. One afternoon, as she was helping him organize old documents in the office, she discovered invoices yellowed by time that proved her grandmother had indeed been a supplier of ceramics for Lawrence's family decades earlier. I don't understand why my grandmother never told me about this story, she murmured, going through the dusty archives. Perhaps because for her it was just one service rendered among others, Lawrence suggested. Jean helped many people without ever boasting about it. This discovery strengthened Emily's conviction that their meeting was not due to chance. An invisible connection had always existed between their families, woven by clay and the transmission of ancestral know-how. Yet despite this soothing revelation, Thomas's hostility persisted like a threatening shadow. His impromptu visits to the house, always tense, created an atmosphere that even the sea breeze couldn't dispel. One evening, as Emily was working late in the improvised workshop, she overheard raised voices from Lawrence's office. A violent argument was opposing father and son. "She's just a distraction." Thomas's voice, charged with anger, resonated despite the closed doors. "While you play patron with this girl, our creditors are getting impatient." "You understand nothing of my motivations," Lawrence replied, his usually composed voice rising a notch. "This isn't about distraction, but about getting back to essentials." "Essentials?" Thomas's bitter laugh penetrated the walls. "The essential thing is that in 3 months, if we don't turn the situation around, we'll lose everything. Everything you've built, everything Mum sacrificed for." The mention of Thomas's mother gave way to a heavy silence, quickly followed by the sound of a door violently slammed. A few minutes later, Emily saw Thomas cross the deck with furious steps. He stopped short upon seeing her in the lit workshop. "Enjoy your stay in paradise," he launched with palpable bitterness. "It won't last." That night, unable to find sleep, Emily contemplated the ceiling of the guest room that Lawrence had assigned to her. Thomas's words played on a loop in her mind. Was she really becoming attached to a man whose financial empire was collapsing? Was she, as Thomas suggested, merely a distraction in the life of a man in crisis? In the early morning, a certainty imposed itself. She needed to understand the whole story, not just the fragments that Lawrence chose to share. After breakfast, she found the courage to confront Lawrence directly. "I heard your conversation with Thomas last night." Lawrence didn't seem surprised. "The walls of this house have never been very thick. Is it true? Will you lose everything in 3 months?" He sighed deeply, placing his coffee cup on the wooden table on the deck. "It's possible, yes, but Thomas dramatizes the situation. We still have options." "Why not tell me?" "Because it has nothing to do with our partnership. My financial problems are the result of bad investment decisions, not a reason to give up what we're building." Emily felt a wave of contradictory emotion overwhelm her. Anger at having been kept in the dark, admiration for this man's resilience, concern for the future of their collaboration. "I can't continue without knowing the whole truth, Lawrence. I deserve to know what I'm getting into." He slowly nodded. "You're right. Come with me." He led her to his office, unlocked a drawer from which he pulled a thick folder. "Here is the entire financial situation of Miller Restorations. The figures, the debts, the deadlines, the possibilities for recovery. I have nothing to hide." During the hours that followed, he explained to her in detail how risky investments in luxury real estate projects, encouraged by unscrupulous advisors, had progressively weakened a once solid company. "I lost sight of what really mattered," he admitted. "Prestige replaced passion. Numbers took precedence over quality. Sometimes we must lose everything to rediscover what we should never have forgotten." Autumn settled on the Maine coast, bringing rains that sometimes transformed the azure sky into a grey, threatening canvas. These bad weather spells, though less violent than the storm that had flooded her workshop, seemed to reflect Emily's inner turmoil. The newly established transparency with Lawrence had brought a form of peace between them, but also raised deeper questions. What was she really seeking in this singular professional relationship? Was it simply artistic recognition, or something more fundamental? A mentor, a father figure, a link with her own roots? The original workshop on Artisan Square had been restored, but Emily continued to divide her time between this space and the outbuilding of the house. The duality of her life, between the modest world of local artisans and Lawrence's more sophisticated universe, created a constant tension within her. Sarah, who had observed this evolution with a mixture of concern and fascination, confronted her one day as they were having lunch at the harbor. "You're changing, Emily. I don't know if it's for better or worse, but you're not the same." "How so?" "Your creations first. They're more ambitious, less spontaneous too sometimes. And then your way of speaking, of carrying yourself. You're adopting some of his mannerisms without realizing it." The observation, though formulated without animosity, struck Emily with its accuracy. Unconsciously, she had begun to absorb certain aspects of Lawrence's personality, his analytical approach to problems, his emotional restraint, even certain linguistic expressions that were peculiar to him. "Is that so terrible?" she asked, defensive. "No, if it's what you really want. But I worry that you're losing yourself in his world, in his vision. Your talent is unique, Emily. It would be a shame if it became a simple extension of his." These words resonated within her for days. Was she sacrificing her artistic identity on the altar of recognition facilitated by Lawrence? Did her new creations, more refined but perhaps less authentic, still reflect her soul, or simply the expectations of a market she was learning to know? One rainy morning, as she worked alone in the house workshop, Thomas made an unexpected appearance. Unlike his previous visits, he seemed calmer, almost resigned. "I owe you an apology," he began, visibly uncomfortable. "My behavior has been unacceptable." Surprised by this reversal, Emily invited him to sit. He observed her works in progress with what appeared to be genuine interest. "My father told me the complete story," he continued. "Your grandmother, his mother, all that shared past. I admit I had trouble believing it at first." "So did I," Emily admitted. A silence settled, broken only by the sound of rain on the bay windows. "He's changed since he met you," Thomas resumed. "For the first time since my mother's death, I see him investing in something that isn't purely financial." "It's not me," Emily gently corrected. "It's what I represent. A link with his past, with his mother." Thomas sketched a sad smile. "Maybe, but the effect is there." He rose, walked slowly around the workshop, stopping in front of a series of small vases with irregular shapes that Emily had just completed. "These pieces are different from the others," he remarked. "More personal. They're experiments. I'm not sure they'll please the New York galleries. My father would like them. They resemble certain creations that my grandmother kept preciously." This observation touched Emily more deeply than she would have imagined. These vases, created in a moment of artistic doubt, represented a return to a more raw, less polished form, which indeed recalled the techniques that her own grandmother had taught her. Before leaving, Thomas turned to her one last time. Whatever you decide for the future, know that my father cares about you more than he'll ever admit. Not in a romantic way, he's never looked at anyone like that since my mother, but you've become important to him. This unexpected visit left Emily in an even greater state of confusion. The apparent reconciliation with Thomas eliminated one obstacle, but revealed others more subtle. Her own artistic identity, Lawrence's growing influence on her work, the direction she truly wished to give her career. That night, in the silence of her room, she made a decision. It was time to find her own voice again, while honoring the heritage she shared with Lawrence. The fresh October wind swept across the Maine coast, carrying away the last summer warmth and announcing a change of season. For Emily, this change also resonated within herself. After days of reflection, she had made a decision that surprised Lawrence. She was returning to her original workshop on Artisan Square while maintaining their professional partnership. Physical distance necessary to preserve her creative independence. "I understand," he had simply replied, with an acceptance that confirmed his trust in her. That morning, reinstalling her tools in the freshly renovated space, Emily felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The workshop, though modest compared to the one at the house, resonated with an authenticity she had missed. The irregular walls, the terracotta floor worn by generations of artisans, the particular light filtering through the small windows, all this was part of her creative identity. Sarah, who came to help her rearrange, didn't hide her satisfaction. "I knew you'd come back to your roots." "I never really left them," Emily gently corrected. "I just needed to step back to better understand them." The following days were dedicated to intense creation. Drawing from the ancestral techniques her grandmother had transmitted to her, but without denying the knowledge acquired from Lawrence, Emily developed a series of pieces that marked a significant evolution in her work. One morning, as she was glazing a set of bowls, Lawrence presented himself at the workshop carrying a thick folder under his arm. His expression, more relaxed than she had seen in weeks, betrayed contained excitement. "I have news that might interest you," he announced without preamble. "The bank has accepted our restructuring plan. We're keeping the main properties, including this house you seem to miss so little." Emily smiled at this slight teasing. "I'm happy for you, really." "That's not all." He opened the folder, revealing architectural plans. "Remember that abandoned old mill at the entrance to town? I've just acquired it. The mill in question, a 19th century industrial building of imposing proportions, had long been left abandoned, a vestige of an era when the region produced luxury textiles. Why this acquisition when you've just stabilized your financial situation?" Lawrence's eyes shone with a gleam she hadn't seen since their first meeting. "To create a center for traditional arts. A place where artisans like you can work, teach, preserve techniques that are being lost." The idea was audacious, almost utopian, transforming an industrial ruin into a living cultural center in the midst of an era of digitalization and mass production. "And you think it's economically viable?" asked Emily, divided between enthusiasm and pragmatism. "Not in a purely financial logic, no. But there are grants for cultural heritage preservation. And above all, I've understood something these past months. True value isn't always measured in figures on a bank account." This phrase, pronounced with quiet conviction, marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, Emily glimpsed the profound transformation that had occurred in Lawrence, a return to essential values that financial success had temporarily eclipsed. In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic established itself. Emily maintained her creative independence in her historic workshop, but actively participated in developing the Arts Center project. Lawrence, for his part, restructured his company to return to fundamentals more aligned with his deep values. Thomas, to everyone's surprise, also became involved in the project, bringing a more contemporary vision that complemented his father's and Emily's traditional approach. His management training, which he had until then used mainly to criticize his father's choices, proved valuable in structuring this ambitious initiative. "There's a synergy between you three that I would never have imagined," commented Mrs. Rose one evening, as they all worked together on plans for the future center around the large table in the house. One November night, as Emily was returning to her apartment after a particularly productive day, she stopped on the maritime promenade. The moon, almost full, created a silver path on the calm waters. In the distance, the lights of Lawrence's house softly twinkled. A thought suddenly struck her. Her grandmother would have been proud, not so much of her nascent artistic success, but of her ability to preserve a heritage while charting her own path. A new perspective, helping not only Emily but also Lawrence and Thomas to rediscover themselves, had just been born from their improbable interactions. The encounters that transform our lives are not always those we expect, but those that awaken in us a dormant truth. Winter settled on the Maine coast, bringing that particular light that had inspired so many artists before Emily, clear, precise, almost chiseling in its cold beauty. Tourists had deserted Golden Bay, leaving the town to its permanent inhabitants and creating an atmosphere of community intimacy. Renovation work on the old mill was progressing rapidly. Each day on her way to her workshop, Emily could observe the gradual transformation of the abandoned building into a space that promised to become the cultural heart of the region. Her own transformation, less visible but just as profound, manifested in her creations. The series she was now developing confidently combined ancestral techniques inherited from her grandmother with a contemporary vision nourished by her recent experience. These pieces, which she had simply titled Confluences, were attracting the attention of critics and collectors beyond the initial circle established by Lawrence. One December morning, as the wind was blowing vigorously, an unexpected visitor presented herself at the workshop. Claire Miller, Lawrence's sister whom Emily had heard about but never met, appeared in the doorway, elegant and intimidating in her dark suit. "So you're the young potter who has upset the balance of our family," she declared without preamble, her scrutinizing gaze evaluating every detail of the workshop and its occupant. Emily, surprised but determined not to be intimidated, invited her in. "I didn't know I had that power." A fleeting smile softened Claire's austere features. "My brother has been talking about nothing but you, and this crazy project for months. Thomas, who barely spoke to his father anymore, is suddenly investing in a venture that will probably never earn a penny. And now I discover that even our family banker is enthusiastic about this renaissance." Claire's visit, though initially tense, evolved into a frank conversation that revealed another facet of the Miller family history. The younger sibling, she had followed a more conventional path than Lawrence, becoming a corporate lawyer in New York, gradually distancing herself from the artisanal roots that her brother had rediscovered late in life. "Did you know that I still own a small bowl created by your grandmother?" she confided, as Emily showed her her latest creations. "Lawrence gave it to me for my 16th birthday. It's perhaps the object I cherish most." This revelation created an unexpected bond between the two women. Claire, despite her initial reluctance, allowed herself to be won over by the enthusiasm surrounding the Traditional Arts Center project. Before leaving, she promised her legal support to navigate the administrative complexities related to the establishment. That same evening, during a dinner at Lawrence's house that now regularly brought together the main actors of the project, Emily observed the dynamic between the members of this family reconstituted by circumstances. Lawrence and Thomas, whose relationship had gradually eased. Claire, who brought a welcome rigor to the organization. Mrs. Rose, a maternal figure who watched over them all with discreet benevolence. And herself, a 20-year-old young artist, unwitting catalyst of a family reconciliation that far exceeded the initial professional framework. "What are you thinking about?" Lawrence gently asked her, finding her on the deck after the meal, contemplating the sea that the moon transformed into a mirror of liquid silver. "About everything that has changed in such a short time. For all of you. For me. Do you regret accepting my proposal that day at the Spring Festival?" Emily reflected for a moment. "No. Despite the doubts, the misunderstandings, I regret nothing. This path was necessary." Lawrence leaned on the railing beside her, his gaze lost toward the horizon. "Do you know what my mother always said? The hands that create never really age." I didn't understand then. I think I'm only beginning to grasp it now. The silence that followed was imbued with a mutual understanding that no longer needed words. Two people separated by age, experience, social status, but united by an invisible thread woven well before their meeting. The Christmas market was approaching, a major event in the economic and cultural life of Golden Bay. This year, Emily would participate not as a simple exhibitor, but as a central figure in a project that was beginning to be talked about well beyond the borders of the small coastal town. Her stand, now transformed into an elegant space in the traditional market, would display pieces that united New England tradition and contemporary innovation. The first creations specifically designed for the future Arts Center, a collection that told the story of her own artistic evolution. The day before the market opened, as she was putting the finishing touches on the preparations, Thomas came to help her install the lighting. Their relationship, once so tense, had transformed into a cautious friendship. "I never really thanked you," he suddenly said, adjusting a spotlight to highlight a series of small vases with iridescent glazes. "For what? For bringing my father back to what really matters. And by extension, for helping me rediscover the man he was before success distanced him from his values." The Christmas market marked a new beginning that no one could have predicted 6 months earlier. Emily's stand, strategically placed at the entrance to the main square, attracted a constant crowd despite the unusual cold that had descended on the Maine coast. Success was immediate, with lines of interested people and invitations for exhibitions in New York, Boston, and even internationally. While other young people her age were seeking opportunities in big cities, she was finding her way by preserving ancestral techniques while reinventing them for the contemporary world. "It's incredible," Sarah murmured, coming to help her on the second day of the market, overwhelmed by the affluence. "You could sell each piece for 3 times more, and people would still buy them." Emily smiled, adjusting a series of bowls with glazes that changed under the winter light. "It's not just a question of price. It's what they represent that touches people." And it was true. Beyond their aesthetic beauty, her creations now carried a story that visitors intuitively perceived, that of a preserved heritage, of a know-how that refused to disappear into the uniformity of mass production. Lawrence, observing the phenomenon with quiet satisfaction, understood better than anyone the scope of what was happening. It wasn't simply the commercial success of a promising young artist, but the validation of a broader vision, the one that now animated their common project. The penultimate day of the market brought a surprise that overwhelmed Emily. Among the crowd of visitors, she recognized a familiar silhouette that had no business being so far from her native village. Martha, her grandmother's best friend, who had come specially from Vermont. "Your grandmother would be so proud," declared the old lady, her misty eyes contemplating the displayed creations. "She told me you had blessed hands, but I wasn't expecting this." Emily led her away from the crowd, moved by this unexpected presence that established a tangible link with her departed grandmother. "How did you know about the exhibition?" Martha smiled mysteriously. "A certain Mr. Miller contacted me. He sent a driver and booked a hotel room. He thought you might need a familiar face from your past today." This thoughtful gesture from Lawrence touched Emily more deeply than all the commercial successes of the past few days. He had understood, with remarkable intuition, that despite the excitement of the present moment, a part of her needed this connection with her roots. Later in the day, as the market was closing its doors for the evening, Lawrence invited her, along with Martha, Thomas, and Claire, to dinner at a small restaurant in the harbor. "I have something to announce to you," he declared, once they were all seated. "The mill renovations will be completed earlier than planned. We'll be able to inaugurate the center before spring." The news was greeted with enthusiasm by all, but Lawrence wasn't finished. "I've also decided on the name for the establishment." He paused, seeking Emily's gaze. "It will be called Wise Hands, a tribute to Jean Thompson and the artisanal traditions of New England that were being lost in the digital age." Emotion overwhelmed Emily. Wise Hands, a subtle play on words that evoked both the wisdom transmitted by the hands of artisans and the memory of her grandmother. "It's perfect," she murmured, unable to add anything more as her throat was tight with emotion. Martha, who had known Jean all her life, approved with a nod, vibrant with emotion. She would have loved the irony. She who always said her hands were nothing wise, that they were rebellious and undisciplined. This evening marked the true turning point in Emily's life. Not so much for the commercial success or artistic recognition, but for this perfect confluence between her past and her future, between the heritage received and the one she was preparing to transmit. The last day of the Christmas market, as night was falling early on Golden Bay and the festive illuminations created a fairy tale atmosphere, Emily observed visitors lingering before her creations. Families, couples, solitary individuals all seemed to touch the pieces with a reverence that went beyond simple consumerist interest. Lawrence approached discreetly, contemplating the scene beside her. "You've created much more than objects, Emily. You've awakened something in this town." She smiled, understanding the depth of this observation. "We did it together." "I'll take it slow" had become the unspoken motto of this unique partnership, built between two generations who had discovered they shared the same love for American traditions. The young hands that molded clay were now also shaping a future where tradition and youth, experience and innovation were no longer opposed, but parts of a harmonious whole that was transforming the small Golden Bay into a center of artisanal renaissance. The highlight of the market, and the true emotional climax, came when Lawrence unveiled a surprise he had been preparing for weeks. A photographic exhibition tracing the history of ceramic artisans in the region from the 1950s to the present day. At the center of this exhibition, a large black and white photograph showed two women working side by side in front of a traditional kiln. John Thompson and Mary Miller, Emily's grandmother and Lawrence's mother, united by their art long before their descendants met. This visual revelation, this tangible proof of the bond that existed between their families, deeply touched all those who knew the story. For Emily, it was confirmation that some connections transcend time and circumstances, guiding our steps toward destinies that seem written in the very clay of our origins. Spring returned to Golden Bay, adorning the coast with bright colors and intoxicating scents. Exactly 1 year after their first meeting at the Spring Festival, Emily and Lawrence stood side by side in front of the transformed old mill, ready to cut the ribbon that would mark the official inauguration of the Wise Hands Traditional Arts Center. The crowd gathered for the occasion testified to the anticipated success of the initiative. Local artisans, cultural representatives, journalists, simple, curious people attracted by this project that was giving new life to a heritage threatened with oblivion. The building itself told a story of rebirth. The stone walls, carefully restored, still bore traces of its industrial past, but the large, newly cut windows flooded the interior with generous light. The space had been divided into individual workshops, training rooms, an exhibition gallery, and a cultural cafe, a complete ecosystem dedicated to the preservation and transmission of artisanal knowledge. "Ready?" Lawrence murmured to Emily, handing her the ceremonial scissors. She nodded, moved by the culmination of this improbable adventure. Together, they cut the ribbon in the colors of New England, navy blue and deep red, triggering applause and cheers. Inside, visitors discovered the different spaces with wonder. The main workshop, equipped with wheels, kilns and workbenches, awaited the first apprentices, young and not so young, eager to learn the techniques that Emily's grandmother had transmitted with such passion. In the gallery, an inaugural exhibition presented the evolution of Emily's work, from her first creations to the sophisticated pieces she now produced. But the central element, the one that attracted all eyes, was a joint installation she had created with Lawrence, a work that perfectly represented their unique partnership. On a base of driftwood recovered from the beaches of Maine, 4 ceramic hands rose, intertwined in a gesture both protective and creative. 2 older hands, marked by experience, supported 2 younger hands, vibrant with energy. Between them, a ball of clay seemed to be taking shape, symbolizing the transmission of knowledge and continuous creation. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, who had finally recognized the value of this atypical relationship between Emily and Lawrence. "They look alive." The title of the work, simply engraved on the base, summed it all up: "I'll take it slow." Later in the day, as the sun began to decline and the crowd gradually dispersed, Emily found Lawrence on the terrace arranged on the roof of the old mill. From there, the view embraced both the Atlantic Ocean and the New England hills, a perfect junction between the two worlds that had shaped their respective stories. "Thank you," she said simply, leaning on the railing beside him. "For what?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "For believing in me, for pushing me to exceed my limits while respecting my rhythm. For all this." She made a gesture encompassing the living building beneath their feet. Lawrence smiled, that rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You know what I see when I look at all this? The beginning, not the culmination." This remark resonated perfectly with what Emily felt. What they had created together was not an end point, but the opening of a new chapter, for them, for the community, for future generations of artisans who would learn here to combine tradition and innovation. Thomas joined them carrying 3 glasses and a bottle of champagne. "I think we've earned a celebration, haven't we? The reconciliation between father and son, perhaps the most beautiful achievement of this tumultuous year, could be read in this simple gesture and in the new complicity that united them." As the sun disappeared on the horizon, tinting the sky purple and gold, Emily contemplated these 2 men whom destiny had placed in her path. One, with his 25 additional years of experience, had taught her to value her art and to see beyond the immediate horizon. The other, initially hostile, had become a precious ally, bringing complementary energy and vision to the project. Between them had woven a bond that transcended usual professional relationships, a chosen family, united by common values and a deep respect for the artisanal heritage they strived to preserve. Night was gently falling on Golden Bay, lighting one by one the lights of the town below. In the growing darkness, Emily's hands retained their own memory, that of shaped clay, applied glazes, ancestral techniques preserved and reinvented. These hands that, at only 21 now, already carried the wisdom of generations of artisans. "To the hands that create," proposed Lawrence, raising his glass, "and to those that transmit." "To wise hands," added Thomas with a knowing smile. Emily clinked glasses with them, feeling deep within herself that her grandmother would have approved. The circle was complete, the heritage preserved, and yet everything was just beginning. True encounters don't make us different. They reveal us to ourselves, reconnecting us to what we truly are, to what we have always been destined to become.